Hello, my name is Michael, and welcome to another Bristlecone broadcast. I have today with me two of my colleagues, Dimitri and Kathy, and today we're going to be talking about war with China. It hasn't happened, hopefully it never happens, but there's been certain events that have happened in the past decade, black swan events, that have really caught supply chain flat-footed. The tsunami in Japan, the war that broke out in Ukraine. There's been many events like this where we read in the news where supply chains are reacting to events that they didn't have any idea were coming and they didn't prepare for. So today we want to talk about the hypothetical. What happens if a limited or a large-scale conflict breaks out with China, or even a trade embargo breaks out with China? How can companies prepare? The two individuals that I have with me today are uniquely situated to talk about this. Dmitry, who is from Kiev, Ukraine, who is keenly aware of what's going on there and can see how supply chains were impacted by that conflict. And Kathy, who was born right across from the Taiwan Strait in Xiamen, China, who has lived and breathed issues with Taiwan, their supply chain, and can talk to us about what would happen hypothetically if war did break out with China. Kathy, since you're intimately acquainted with that area, what do you see as the sequence of events that would lead to a conflict with China? Are there any warning signs that you would look for in either the political discourse, current events that would tell people that this is coming, or are we already there? It's already at the tipping point.
I don't think we're there yet. There is a competition between U.S. and China, but their goal is smart people need to think about. The goal is to co-assist, right? What is the co-competition kind of thing? Because it's not in our best interest, not in China's either, and not in U.S. either, to go into the war. Everybody knows it because that the ramifications huge. So what I would hate to see, and if there's a rhetoric in terms of getting war, the anti-China, and the China side, the hotline is about anti-US. If that escalates, then we will get to a dangerous point. Now, competition is that trade war. Yes, that will be there, and that will be an issue. It will continue to be an issue, and will have an impact, and the company need to prepare for it. But in terms of war, what we need to monitor is the policy. It's the in a policy standpoint, in the opinion standpoint, in the opinion of the public opinion, what the people feel about this war.
If something did break out with China, how can companies prepare for it? Let's assume it either happens tomorrow, maybe it happens many years from now. What's the different postures companies can take?
So business continuity plan is must have. And my previous experience within the war was in reality in Ukraine started in 2014. That wasn't that hot and that big as it is right now. But right there at that moment, I have multiple requests from my clients. If we as a company are prepared, if we have a BCP in place and what's inside, how many details is there. And we had one, but quite a primitive. And I believe that was one of the mistakes, that primitive BCP was continued to be there mostly formally, but not with regular updates and not prepared for the significant events like happened in the previous year. And that was quite difficult to companies to respond on such situations.
So Dimitri, this BCP, what goes into it? And how do you actually even formulate a plan where you don't know the events that occurred? Do you assume the worst? Do you assume different stages of what a conflict in China could be? And is it just related to China, or do you have to take into account the global ramifications?
It is a global thing, and especially for the global companies with the multiple vendors supplying the goods or supplying these services, that must be in place. Take into account the global situation, the global political, macro political things, and all of the risks should be calculated and respond to that risk as a probably we can do nothing to prevent, but we can mitigate the consequences of that event to the company. Be able to shift everything you have in a certain place, move it somewhere else, and run continually the business from that new location.
What immediately comes to mind that's going to happen if any company has exposure to China? What literally happens the next day? Conflict breaks out, company has exposure to China. What can they expect to see that happens in their supply chain?
Well, I can tell you, if a conflict breaks out in China with in that region, I think that supply chain will come to a standstill.
Okay.
Yeah, the impact in the supply chain, impact to the global economy is far-reaching, has just ripple effect across the entire globe. I mean, just thinking about potentially blockade, just not even the war, just blockade of the airspace and the ocean space would deprive 20% of all the assets, global assets for United States, and 90% of all the productions in the chip space. So we're talking about it is not just a regional impact, it's a global impact.
So do you believe, Kathy, that if a conflict did break out, that companies could follow a BCP to try to shift and limit the damage to this conflict, or would they have to radically rethink the entire business? From what it sounds like, it's a pretty bleak picture if a conflict breaks out.
Absolutely, yes. BCP will work to the certain extent. Definitely, the company need to prepare for BCP. However, it will be smart to, from starting now, to think about how the business model can be flexible enough to deal with this event. And it is about building the redundancy, building the diversification. Okay, so diversify your supply base, diversify your critical manufacturing capability, diversify your logistic service providers, so that if one ship goes down, there's other route. Okay, this is, in the past, we're talking about lean manufacturing and lean operation, just-in-time inventory. I think that it's to companies' benefit to rethink about some of those strategies. We could still be lean, but can we build in some kind of redundancy, some kind of resiliency to support that, so that in the event things happen, we can change the supply base, or we can easily redivert the goods from different countries, different regions.
Got it. So Dimitri, going to Ukraine and seeing if there's any lessons learned, what were the biggest lessons that you've seen companies learn from Ukraine? When that broke out, you said that you had very sort of basic BCPs in place, but what were other lessons rather than just we needed a better one? What were some of the immediate lessons that came from that conflict?
We have better understanding of the timeline of the events and the consequences of the certain events. There's definitely some gaps in between of the things people see, but also the fact which has never been incorporated into the BCP is actually shock. People appear to be, and which is actually freezing, even if you have a plan and even if you have everything ready, the psychology still works that way. With such big events, they get the minds frozen for some period of time, and that's a nature.
So with that though, would you recommend scenarios or just actually like live drills where this happens and war rooms kind of speak? Like how do you overcome shock?
I think the modeling of the situation and even basic drills for the core people who are involved in such processes would be a good idea. From the perspective of the rerouting and diversification of the suppliers, that would be a good practice to have and switch from time to time, from the major to the backup, and be able to and know how it works and know how to make the operations inside of it.
I don't think it will happen. In a very unlikely event, it will happen. But still, it's smart for company to prepare for the event, because even the trade war, even the blockage of the Taiwan Strait, and without having a war, it still have a very dramatic impact in supply chain and global economy.
Great. Well, the message is loud and clear. At the very least, have a BCP in place, maybe some modeling, some drills, just to overcome that shock factor, build in redundancy and resiliency. This is something that we do provide here. It's an exercise that you can do internally, but we usually recommend to bring in an external resource to help. Dimitri and Kathy are more than happy to have a conversation with you if this is something you would like to explore. But we thank you for tuning into this Bristlecone broadcast, War with China. It's a very sort of clickbait headline, but something that you have to think about, because whether it's war with China or some other black swan events, we've seen that they happen pretty regularly every couple of years. So we hope that you're not caught flat-footed and you can react with speed, so that you can maintain your company, maintain your workforce, and keep driving business forward.